Hi there, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Val Lasnitz. I'm the Planning Director for Howard County. The mic is on. Can you hear me? How about now? Good? How about now? Is that better? How about now? Okay. Technology. So, yeah, if you could all please take your seats. Welcome to tonight's meeting. It's great to see that we've got so many people here interested in the future of Ellicott City. This has been a long-term project that the county has had underway, and we have a lot of information to share with you this evening. It's been a tough process. There have been a lot of very difficult decisions that have been made throughout this entire process. We've had, as I said, numerous community meetings to gain input, and we're at a point now where we're just about ready to wrap the master plan process and to proceed on to developing the plan. We were at this stage back in May of 2018 before the flood hit. And so we kind of rewound the entire process and restarted it, and this is the culmination. We'll be coming back out to you again with additional input once the draft plan is completed. So before we begin, how many of you have been in previous meetings? Okay, so we have a lot of educated people here. Great. And I'd also like to welcome, I don't know where he is now, Councilman Weinstein. There he is. Welcome. He's not going to be speaking this evening, so the burden is on staff. So with that, what I'm going to do is to go through the agenda first. We're going to recap where we've been in the process that began after the 2016 flood. Kind of revisit the steps that we've been through and some of the findings that have been drawn from that effort. And then I'm going to turn it over to our consultant team. They'll be sharing new information with you. And then we'll have an opportunity for discussion following the presentation. So if you could hold your questions until the end, we've got a lot of information that we need to go through. We'll stay here until we've cycled through most of the questions and comments. We'll try to get through them all, but we do have a time limit on this evening for the room itself. And we'll spell out next steps there and have an opportunity then for any additional offline conversation. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about where we've been. So tonight you're going to see some new and refined master plan concepts. They're in response to a 5-year plan. It's a near-term plan. It's an implementation plan for specific projects for Ellicott City. And you'll have many ways to provide input this evening. We've got an online option that's going to be live early next week, and we'll keep it active through mid-November. We also have a comment input form that you can turn in at the end of the evening, or we encourage you to take it home and then help fill out your online survey. Again, that will be going live early next week. Then we also have some index cards that if you could write your key questions on, we're going to have staff kind of roaming around at the end. Turn your questions, comment cards in, and then you'll have an opportunity to speak at the microphone. So again, we've got a lot of information to cover, and please, if you're not on our email list to receive master plan notifications, go on our website and this address and sign up. So before the 2018 flood occurred, we determined that a master plan needed to be done for Ellicott City. It needed to be comprehensive. We relied on citizen input to help shape it, to rebuild Ellicott City. And it also had to address multiple objectives. Ellicott City is a complex location. It's a historic community. It's a gem when it comes to architectural character. It's a vital downtown. And we wanted to make sure that the master plan reflected infrastructure changes to alleviate flooding, but we knew that those may affect the urban design character of Ellicott City. So that was an important consideration. And it had to be broad because it's not just about downtown Ellicott City. This plan is about the entire watershed, which makes it very challenging. So why this comprehensive approach? Again, Ellicott City is an important tourism resource. It's a designated sustainable community. It's a Maryland Main Street, and it has historic features qualifying it both as a local county district as well as a National Register district. So as a result of the 2016 flood, the Department of Planning and Zoning, together with other county departments, we did a nationwide search to find a consultant team to help us develop this master plan. We wanted somebody with national experience, we wanted somebody with flood experience, and we wanted somebody who was good at community outreach. So we ended up hiring a facilitator. Many of you probably participated in those meetings. Somebody with post-Katrina and post-9/11 experience in New York City. We were lucky because we were able to hire a local firm that had national experience with these types of planning efforts, with specialties in urban design, engineering, historic preservation, development economics, environmental planning, and again, the importance of community outreach. And they've been involved in other flood-impacted communities. So that was a real great thing. We looked nationally, but we were able to find somebody local here from the Baltimore area, although they do have other team members who come from other locations. As part of the 2016 flood, we initiated a pretty extensive public outreach effort. Following the 2016 flood, there was a community advisory group that was established. That was established after the July 30th flood, and it was chaired by former County Executive Roby. We held numerous listening and learning sessions to get the community ready for the master plan. At that point, the community was in pain. People had gone through, traumatic experiences, and it wasn't fair to begin the process of, well, what do you think the future of Ellicott City was when they were still going through a process just dealing with what they had just experienced. So when the master plan kicked off, we formed a master plan advisory team. It included property owners, business owners, residents, and members of the nonprofit community. Their role was to advise and be a sounding board as the plan was being developed. As part of that process, we hosted 4 public workshops at key milestones along the way and interviewed dozens of stakeholders throughout that effort. As part of our outreach process, we had multiple opportunities for the public to provide input through a community survey that was online. As part of that process, a vision for Ellicott City was developed, and its watershed, that it would be a model resilient community that thrives by protecting its people, commerce, history, culture, and natural environment. That vision was underpinned by 4 pillars. How Ellicott City would rebuild, with an emphasis on resilience and placemaking, the importance of making sure that people recognized Ellicott City as an important place in the county. From an environmental perspective, to protect the environment, to preserve Ellicott City's heritage, and to make sure that the downtown's economy is revitalized because it had taken such a huge hit in 2016. So the process through the CAG, the Community Advisory Group, began to develop ideas. Those ideas were generated at the meetings through our online survey, and we ended up with about 300 different ideas on how to address the flooding in Ellicott City and how it should be rebuilt and what are the important things that we as planners need to recognize. There was also a hydrology and hydraulics model that was developed. And that's a term that is going to be used throughout the evening, and I just want to explain to you quickly what a hydraulics and hydrology model is, an HNH model. So the hydrology part of it is related to the study of rainfall and water as it relates to geography and geology. The hydraulics portion of it is once that water hits the ground, it's geared towards physics. How does that water react when it is being contained and directed through various streams and man-made devices? And there were a number of projects that were identified through that H&H analysis, and also through the master plan process, the Hudson Bend was identified. And the Hudson Bend basically is an opening of the river channel, the stream channel, in kind of what I'd call the midsection of downtown Ellicott City. It daylighted streams that had been either constrained or placed underground, and it provided an opportunity to facilitate the flow of water through this portion of downtown. At that point, we also identified buildings that needed to be demolished in order to accommodate this open stream channel. It involved a relocation of the brewery annex, partial removal of the Lapa Lapa, and with that, the open stream channel would create a great public space. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who will talk a little bit about the H&H model. Okay.
So by the show of hands earlier about people who've already been to previous meetings and have heard about the HNH study, we already have I believe that we have a basis that we can all work from. So I think the definition of an H&H study was very good. And but to move forward, just to kind of review of what the H&H study was, it was, and let's see if I can advance the slide. Well, the H&H study was was done after the 2016 storm. Now, we had done a previous study in 2011 after that storm. However, we had constrained that study. But the basic idea of the study was, let's look at the 100-year storm, and could we store or improve conveyance to a point where the stream channels and most of the stream system or network would really only experience a 10-year storm. We believe that the conveyance systems at a 10-year storm level would reduce flooding significantly. So we started from that design assumption and gave that to McCormick Taylor. But in 2011, and they developed the model, but in 2011, we said just look at facilities that you could place, like retention facilities or underground facilities, things like that. But only look at public property. See what you can do on public property. And it wasn't very much because we don't really own a lot of property in the watershed. It is a developed watershed, especially on the Hudson branch. And so there weren't a lot of opportunities. In 2011, we did come up with some recommendations that we started to move forward with. But in 2016, we, after that rain event, we said, you know, just look at the entire watershed and tell us what opportunities we have for retention, for underground storage, for conveyance improvements. We just want to know what it is. And no matter what it was, you know, let's just take a look at it. So it was more of an unconstrained model for us. We didn't consider the constructability of projects. We didn't want to limit that. So it was like, well, let's not worry about constructability. What would work? We weren't necessarily worried about cost, but we do know that they came up with 18 projects, recommended 18 projects for about $85 million. And then there were the tunnel bores, which were approximately about $60 million. But we weren't worried about that, just show it in the report. And the complexity of planning and permitting, we weren't worried about that either. All we were worried about was give us what's possible, and then we can winnow it down based on what our limitations are going to be. So the model, without getting into the details of the model, because we have talked about the 18 projects before, the model was an important baseline for the master plan. So we had these 18 projects, and then we started our master planning, and so then whatever the master planning team was coming up with, we had a model that existed, and we tested those ideas through the hydraulic model that McCormick Taylor had developed. And that was one of the projects, was something Val just mentioned, was the Hudson Bend project. So we tested that. And there were many, many other iterations of other improvements that the master planning team looked at that we passed through the model. So the model and the original projects were never meant to be a substitute for the Ellicott City Master Plan. It was all supposed to run through the Ellicott City Master Planning team and be tested out through the model. So one of the questions that is, so we had these 18 projects for $85 million, but we had set aside the tunnel projects, and we felt at the time, for good reason, the cost of the projects, they were so limited in nature of where they actually did function. If we had done 18 projects, lots of areas within the Tiber-Hudson watershed would see significant reductions in water levels. But the lower end of Main Street, not so much. The tunnels were important for that, but we were trying to figure out other ways because the tunnels were, individual discrete projects of $30 to $40 to $50 million each. And they weren't going to be something that was accomplished in a short 5-year period. Certainly not in the immediacy of how much could we do in 1 year. But we explored two tunnels, a south tunnel and a north tunnel, and I'll talk about the south tunnel first. And so what you see up on the screen right now is the south tunnel, and I know that pointer does not work, but what you'll see in the dark gray area, probably to the left of the leftmost portion of this tunnel, is that's the confluence of the New Cut and the Tiber branches, and the tunnel goes underground from that point all the way underneath the railroad tracks and then out to the Patapsco River. So this is it in plan view. This is a 20-foot diameter tunnel. It's a huge tunnel. We looked at other tunnel sizes, and we settled on a 20-inch tunnel, a 20-foot tunnel, because it was the only thing that really moved the needle. Here it is in profile, and you can see at the leftmost, this is the confluence of the Tiber and the Hudson. And then, of course, as you move to the right, you see the 20-foot proposed borehole. Okay. So I have a pointer. And there it is. All right, so this is the Tiber. Let me just go back to the plan view. It might be a little... This is the New Cut coming in, and this is the Tiber. The confluence is right here. This is the beginning of the tunnel, and it extends underground, under St. Paul, under the church, and then exits under the railroad tracks here at the Patapsco River. Here it is in profile. Here's your Tiber Hudson. Here's your borehole, which would be a 20-foot tunnel again. And here's a weir structure because, and this is the profile of the ground. And here's St. Paul's Church. And then here's Mulligan's Hill. Here's a railroad track. And then, of course, the river. And this is the water elevation. It's being shown here. The crest elevation here at this weir is about 125 feet above sea level. And it's showing that the Hudson right here, the Tiber Hudson, is slightly above it. The water would fall down this flume into this 20-foot tunnel. Of course, this gets much, much higher, would fall down into it. One of the issues that we had that is the tailwater is up around 126, and this elevation was 125. And so when the tailwater from a storm, this is the elevation of the Patapsco, this actually is moving up the pipe. And that's not what we want. We don't want it to move up. And the way that it could overcome that is if the water builds up high enough on this side, it'll push that water through. So, but if we allowed that water to build up to the necessary elevation, it's flooding Main Street. So so we weren't too impressed with this. And then the other issue here is that at the railroad track, this is a scale drawing, and this is a scale drawing, and here's the railroad tracks, and it's about 8 feet below the track. So we don't know what this soil looks like, if it's solid granite, like a lot of this is, but it might not be here, closer to the river. But you know, if it wasn't solid granite, it'd be a big problem. And constructing this piece underneath the railroad. And if it was granite, we still would have some issues with vibration, with cracking, with just constructability issues, and dealing with CSX, who would rightly be concerned that this tunnel might ruin their train and their moving freight. So the south tunnel initially was, and then we figured it would be, and I know there's been other estimates that have been thrown out there, but we still kind of stand by our original estimate for construction design and a lot of the other items necessary in construction, that this tunnel would cost about, and it's only 600 to 700 feet long, but it would cost about $31,000 to $32,000 a linear foot. And I know that in some of the council meetings or in some of the other hearings that we've had, people have brought other prices up, but we've kind of confirmed it. That was from one consultant. We do have another consultant that we are using for other parts of the design effort, and they looked at it independently. They found very similar results. They're around $30,000 to $35,000 per linear foot. So we're comfortable with that number, that's what this would cost. And so this is about a $30 to $40 million project. Based on those and some of the constructability issues, I mean, these are, I'm not going into a lot. I don't want to get really down in the weeds to the constructability, but, you know, these are the major concerns. And so we thought, well, let's put that project aside. So then we looked at a north tunnel bore, and this one needs a little bit of explaining. So I don't have a plan view of this, but this is the start of it right here. And this would start somewhere in Lot F. We never thought of exactly where. We just said start, you know, it would start there. This is a, it would need to be, well, it would either need to be a big, like periscope thing that would catch water, or a hole in the ground. And so this diameter might be somewhere around 30 feet or greater. It could be a 30-foot hole or greater, great, that's in Lot F. And we couldn't figure out, well, from a constructability point of view, I mean, constructability, where do you put that? And then, you know, can you put anything on top of it? No. You know, do you create a vortex that sweeps everything down through it when it rains really hard? Probably. So this would be an issue. This tunnel, the scale is, this drawing is to scale, but the horizontal is truncated slightly. So this is a 34-foot diameter pipe chute that goes down into the ground. It goes down into the ground 39 feet. So it's about 4 stories below the ground. It's about 35 feet wide. I'll use round numbers. And then it goes down into a 12-foot tunnel that would be bored at a 17-foot diameter to allow to be cast, a concrete pipe to be cast at 12 feet. This would run approximately 1,600 feet and empty into the Patapsco River. This elevation, we never got as far as putting tailwater on it. We just assumed a low tailwater that's not a storm. And then this is the profile of the ground. It doesn't have landmarks on it, but of course, this actually, it goes under Court Avenue, not Court, yeah, Church, maybe parts of Emory, and then comes out somewhere through underneath the railroad tracks again and into the Patapsco River. So this one turned out to be at about $30-some thousand. This turned out to be about $30 to $50 million to construct, and we felt that it would only go north from there. This elevation from about here to here is almost 100 feet. So it's very deep in the ground. Of course, you know, Church Street is a hill, and everything, the elevations really shoot up. But we're very low below the ground. But just from the fact that we'd be going under a lot of historic structures, residential structures, and there would be a lot of vibration. There are a lot of constructability issues in terms of vibration, safety, things like that, and cost for one project, which was at least half to maybe 2/3 of all the other projects. We said, well, let's set that aside. None of the tunnel projects were ever forgotten, except I truly believe we will not go for a south tunnel. I don't think that that's feasible. But anyway, so we just set it aside. And certainly with the mandate to say, you know, try to do as much as you can in the 1-year time frame, and how much more can you do in the 5-year time frame, that this project was not considered to be a project that could be in the 5-year period. And I don't know exactly how long it would take us to go through planning, design, permitting, and construction, but it's not in the 5-year period. The other thing, it hasn't really been tested through, it hasn't been tested through the model accurately enough to know how much it actually contributes. But the feeling is a 12-foot tunnel, one of them was 20 feet, this one's 12, that this would be a supplement, but it isn't the silver bullet that anyone could hope for. Okay, so the tunnels themselves aren't the silver bullet, and that's the reason why they were set off to the side. The next slide I want to show you is from Washington, D.C. This is their D.C. Water has got a project where it's called the Clean Rivers Project. And regardless of the reason why they're building it, they're building 23-foot diameter tunnels in the city. And you can see, the reason why I think these pictures are so great is because this is this is for the 23-foot tunnel. I mean, our south tunnel is 23 feet. Our north tunnel is 17, so it's basically the same scale. And it just shows you, now this is, granted, this is 100 feet in the ground. And I'm really estimating that. I'm figuring that each one of these is about 10 feet, and the scaffolding is 1 story. And so this is about 100 feet in the ground. We would be, our tunnel at the deepest would be 100 feet, but we would probably start, well, we're starting at 39 feet below the ground, probably a little bit more, probably 50 feet. And it's a huge concrete structure that needs to be built just to lower in the bore machinery. And you can't really see it here, but this is a crane, the type of crane that's used to lower this kind of equipment down into the hole. And so from a constructability, feasibility, we need to be able to find all the room to put that equipment. And it's not that it can't be done, okay? But it's just that we have to it just doesn't fit neatly into a very tight 5-year period where we get things done. Now, this is the shoring that's holding up this historic block in DC. That had to be constructed before they could take all this out and then start to dig this chute. So these two, I thought, were great to include because it gives you a sense of scale of what we're talking about. It's just not a thin hole that goes in the ground. And a 30-foot diameter opening, you know, and then you have to put a grate on that, okay, to stop things that, cars, things like that, from going down, people from going down in it. And so then, you know, that can get blocked. Just like your, you know, just like my cellarway, the drain in my cellarway gets blocked with leaves and floods my basement. Similarly, this is going to get blocked with huge trees, cars, anything else that can float. And so it really becomes another headache that we have to deal with trying to keep it clear. So they weren't that all sums up to why it's not the silver bullet. And I just wanted to show that, and I know that I'm sure a lot of you still have questions about it, and we'll talk about it during the Q&A part. But I just wanted to bring these up, and I think I'll bring Val back up.
Okay. Thank you. So post-2018 May, the master plan objectives are the same ones, but you'll notice we have one at the top, the life preserver. Life safety was added as one of the major considerations. While it was reflected in the previous 4 pillars, you know, who would have thought that as we were developing the approach back with the community advisory group, developing the pillars, that we would be confronted with yet another flood. And so we identified that as one of the primary drivers. So in effect, we've got a 5th pillar here. And as Mark explained, there's a time frame that is important here. Water's not waiting. Storms like this are more frequent, more common, and time is of the essence. And in particular, Ellicott City, according to the National Weather Service, of their 44 county forecast region, Ellicott City is the most vulnerable location in their entire area. So we expect that the storm that we saw just this past year can be repeated again and again and again, which is why the importance of this near-term strategy. And we're not alone. 2018 has not been a great year in terms of flooding. Numerous communities, the Midwest, the East Coast, have all been confronting this. And flash floods in an area like Ellicott City with shallow rock, steep grades, creates additional problems. You know, I was in Colorado when the 1982 flood hit the Big Thompson, and people were swept away in tents and sleeping bags. It happened in 1976, and again it happened in September of 2013, when they've got a similar deluge compared to the one that we got in Ellicott City just this past summer, or past spring. Vermont has also experienced these kinds of issues. Our project team has been involved with some of the post-planning, you know, in the Northeast as a result of the flooding. And we've even looked to other countries, and you'll see some examples that our consultants will talk about in Calderdale in the UK. The common element here is they're doing something about it. Boulder's restoring greenways, they're acquiring property, they're removing high-hazard structures. Vermont river towns are removing buildings to restore floodplain and to create parks. And in Calderdale, they're removing buildings that overhang the river. They're being demolished as part of flood mitigation. So time is of the essence. Our goal here is that the 5-year plan identify and begin implementing projects before the next thunderstorm or hurricane season in a way that would reduce flood depths and velocities, water velocity, to that level that can be addressed by flood-proofing the buildings in lower downtown. So that was the result. The result of that goal was the near term, or the 5-year plan. And it's the most effective way to approach these issues because it addresses protecting lives. It's urgent. It addresses urgency because most of the projects can be addressed in a shorter period of time. Their feasibility and constructability has been looked at as part of engineering analyses, and we found that these projects are the most cost-effective from a perspective of, for every dollar spent, the benefit gain. And again, this allows projects to move forward within the first year. The master plan interfaces with this near-term or 5-year plan. Typically in a master plan, you identify implementation strategies that are identified as near, mid, and long-term. Following the 2018 flood, the focus was on what can we do in the near term. So that became the focus of the approach that Mark had talked about here. So the 5-year plan is the near-term plan. It accelerates construction. It includes the Hudson Bend. It includes the concept of a widened stream channel from Ellicott Mills Drive to Maryland Avenue. And it also includes projects that were selected through the first phase of the HNH project. Again, it focuses on retaining water and conveying water. Projects that have been tested through the HNH analysis, and the short-term plan is going to be nested into the master plan for Ellicott City as the initial phase. And through public input like this, we hope to get guidance this evening on the design of the expanded stream channel that involves taking buildings out. We hope that it does in fact become a major amenity and focal point, and you'll see why we think that this is entirely possible. And as part of that process, the longer term and midterm projects, we're going to be looking at what other types of projects should we be evaluating for the Ellicott City watershed. So the council voted on October 1st of this year to fund phase 1 of the 5-year plan. The county's recently submitted a permit application to widen the stream channel in lower downtown to the MDE and the Army Corps of Engineers. That does involve removing buildings. The application triggers what's called a Section 106 analysis, which looks at the historic structures and properties that are impacted, and the county's hired consultants to help us with that process. And in addition, as we look to remove structures within the Ellicott City watershed, there's been a Historic Structures Review Committee established that will help advise the county on preserving key historic elements and buildings that somehow can be reused later on. Council Bill 56/2018, which establishes a moratorium for development in the Ellicott City watershed, basically requires the Department of Planning and Zoning and the Department of Public Works to study flood mitigation both for the Tiber-Hudson watershed as well as the Plumtree watershed in Valley Mead. We've begun that process. We had a meeting with the Department of Planning and Zoning to look at a process that we'd be going through to look at how can the upper reaches of the watershed be addressed. Right now the focus has been primarily on Ellicott City. We are also going to be looking at the upper reaches of that watershed. One of the things that you'll see this evening is reuse of the courthouse property. The courthouse is scheduled to move to Bendix Road by 2021. And the county's goal right now is to look at a developer solicitation for the reuse of the old Ellicott City courthouse. And what we hope is that that reuse plan can begin or be initiated as the courthouse moves out. So with that, I'm going to be turning it over to our consultant team, but we've got some additional steps we just want to identify here. So early next week, we'll have that online survey available for the public. It'll be available until mid-November. November through January, the Department of Planning and Zoning and all of the other departments are going to be working with a consultant team to prepare a draft plan. We're going to be coming back out to the community in February of 2019 with that draft plan in an open house for additional input. Following that, the plan will then begin its formal process of being adopted. As you recall, the plan for Ellicott City is will become part of the general plan for Howard County. So that amendment process involves going to the planning board as well as to the county council. And then one of the key steps in that process is going to be a plan to monitor progress, and that needs to be continuous. So with that, I believe I turn it over to our consultants. All right.
Thank you, Val. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Tom McElloway from Mahan Reichel, leading the consultant team. I have with me Jeff Doobie, Megan Oliver from our office, Ward Hoblisser from Land Studies, Matt Thomason, and Jim Burnett from RK&K, and I think Lisa Wingate from Preservation Consulting. So where we were, as Val said, we had our last public workshop back in March of 2018. We were preparing to submit the draft in June 2018 when the flood hit. Where we are now, so over the summer, the counties explored the additional modeling that Mark and Val had reviewed with Cormac Taylor, developed the 5-year strategy, and then the master plan team was re-engaged to incorporate that 5-year strategy into the master plan. As Val indicated, the boundaries of the master plan are the watershed, the area highlighted in blue, the county office buildings highlighted where we are right now. It is a long-range plan, 30 years. There's short, mid, and long-term strategies and recommendations. We'll be outlining that in the draft that comes out. And in that short term is included this 5-year strategy and action plan. And priorities will be determined by a number of factors that we've kind of already gone through this evening. And one of the things that's really unique about this master plan is so many things are interconnected. So you can't touch one thing without impacting so many others. So it's really creates a real challenge here. But that's what also makes Ellicott City so unique, is all of these interrelated components. So I'm going to hit, since it's been since March, since we really hit on a lot of this, a very high-level summary of the master plan recommendations. One of the things we've heard is, all the focus is on Lower Main. What about the other recommendations? I'm not going to get into great detail, but just show you what's included in the master plan. Then our focus discussion will be Lower Main and the riverfront, and then some of these newer concepts that are grounded in the additional modeling and 5-year strategy. I want to emphasize, you've seen some of the images online already. This is showing a design intent. There's still a lot of work. This is not final design. There's a lot of back and forth and additional modeling that has to be done. And then we also have to recognize the Section 106 process that will be underway as well. So, one of the things that makes this watershed so challenging is the steep topography, the granite, the multiple tributaries leading into the Patapsco, and for obvious reasons, the town was settled right on top of the tributaries for the mill energy and harnessing that energy for mills. The bottom map, the historic maps, you could see is a good illustration of, especially in Lower Main, where some of these buildings are built right over the stream and the tributary channel, obviously for harnessing that power in the early days. That then creates all the wonderful intricacies and character of the community. It also creates and compounds a lot of the challenges. As we expand out into the watershed, these tributaries offer wonderful green connections and fingers out into the watershed, and will be, a lot of the recommendations in the master plan are to enhance these green fingers both for physical connectivity but environmental connectivity. The implementation of the master plan, it's partnerships, deliberate partnerships between the public and private sector, and all of the recommendations are interrelated. We can't touch one flood strategy without impacting parking, historic preservation, economic development, and so forth. And it's not going to be the county doing all of this. There's going to be individuals, organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and different agencies within the county. Val already hit the vision statement, so I'm going to go over that, and we also hit the core goals of the master plan, including the life safety that was added since the last flood. These core goals inform or apply to the 5 strategies that we've developed. We presented these back in March. I'm going to just, at a very high level, hit each of these. Managing and protecting the water. This has our work and our study has addressed that the reducing flood impacts is through a combination of conveyance and retention, but while balancing life safety, water quality, cost benefits, constructability, and policies for growth and revitalization, some of the things that Mark had already hit on. The 5 broad recommendations in this category, each which includes numerous recommendations, are the flood management strategies, including the 5-year plan, but that also includes longer term, looking at what other recommendations of the HNH study are applicable and worth exploring beyond the 5 years and in the long term. It includes a number of recommendations on emergency management, non-structural flood proofing, and we talked in March about a Tiber-Hudson watershed special protection district or special enhancement district that will start to examine stormwater regulations, criteria for development and redevelopment, and a number of other aspects, and then also water quality improvements. One of the things that we've met with the Office of Emergency Management, and the county is going to be sitting down with them in more detail because their component and their work really needs to be a strong component of this master plan. So looking at elements of risk awareness, we'll be looking at how sensors and cameras can be incorporated into streetscape improvements in the downtown environment, how alert warning systems can be integrated, and then looking at access control and evacuation routes. And then also, how does that messaging get incorporated into the public realm? These are some examples of some of the Howard County business preparedness plans, but they'll also be incorporated in the environment, high ground maps, monitoring warning systems, and so forth. The second overall strategy is planning for economic success. We need this to be a successful community. Within that, we had a number of recommendations, historic preservation program enhancements, including looking at strategies for dealing with neglected and vacant properties, market attraction. Market study was done looking at businesses that are most likely attracted to Ellicott City, and so what are some opportunities for them to occur, whether it's in new construction or relocating some of the existing businesses displaced by floods, and then business support strategies for cooperative marketing and business development plans, not only for new businesses but also for existing businesses. A third overarching strategy was enhancing the experience. These are all the recommendations that deal with transportation, parking, streetscape, open space, public art, lighting, programming, events, recommendations that really the experience when someone gets out of their car and comes to Ellicott City, how are they experiencing the community? And again, each one of these is nested with a number of very specific recommendations. You might remember this diagram from last March. Just in terms of the pedestrian experience, the red line represents the sidewalk system along Main Street from Lower Main off to the right, on up to the West End, on up to Courthouse Hill, and through Lot D. The green line represents this opportunity with the stream conveyance improvements of creating a network of sidewalks and trails that follow these conveyance methods from the river, from Oella across the river, now in through Lower Main, up through Hudson Bend, on up to Courthouse Hill, the Bernard Fort House, and on into the West End. Again, this is a network that would be implemented over the very long term in bits and pieces, but it creates a great opportunity for how one experiences Ellicott City. With this recommendation, we also have a lot of parking recommendations that we're dealing with, and if you recall from March, we're, the main locations where we could offset parking loss from some of these flood improvements are decks in Lot A and Lot D and possibly Lot F. They're the logical locations for a deck structure, and then also coupling that with temporary shuttle systems during construction. The fourth category is protecting and enhancing the environment, not only looking at the historic district, but the areas surrounding the historic district, looking at new development. How do we enhance some of the development criteria so that buildings are designed and development is designed to fit the land, not the land designed to fit the structures. Also looking at the community brand, character overlay districts as one approaches the historic district, and what are some guidelines for implementation, and how do we enhance that character with character-based codes, and that would be included in the zoning ordinance. Also looking at the community brand that's been established for Old Ellicott City, and then how do we extend that into a marketing campaign, and whether it's construction signs to help communicate the message that construction is happening to improve the community, banners, and then marketing signs. How do we embrace some of the challenges, our steep slopes, and if we ask people to park at Courthouse Hill, how do we kind of poke a little bit of fun at ourselves that, it is a hike up to Courthouse Hill, but it is doable. And then the last strategy, a very important one, organizing for success, is how do we implement all of this? And you may recall we talked a lot about the very important that there is an organizational entity whose sole focus is Ellicott City. Ellicott City is a small component of overall Howard County. It's a very unique community, has very unique qualities and characteristics, and there needs to be an entity that thinks only about Ellicott City. We've recommendations exploring sustainable funding for this entity, and then also looking at forums, whether it's just an Ellicott City forum that happens annually to discuss the progress of the master plan and other issues, and then also a bi-county summit with Baltimore County. This organizational entity, again, as I said, the sole focus would be Ellicott City. The function would be to manage Ellicott City and oversee deliberate partnerships to implement the master plan and to manage the Ellicott City district. And it really needs to, the organization entity needs to have an understanding of urban mixed use revitalization and seeking innovative solutions, not Ellicott City is very different from the other 90% of the county, and so this really needs to be focused on unique and innovative situations for Ellicott City, and then understanding of Ellicott City's unique character and distinct form, that a development project that works somewhere else in the county may not be appropriate for Ellicott City. So that's a very quick high-level look at some of the broad categories, but we wanted to kind of give a context of now where some of these new and refined concepts fit into the overall master plan. So where we want to focus tonight is Lower Main and the riverfront, Hudson Bend, and some of the Upper Main areas, West End Main, Courthouse Hill, and then the broader watershed, particularly as it relates to debris management. So this is the overall illustrative plan for the core and West End, Maine that we've been developing prior to the last flood, and we've been updating. Some of the disclaimer at the bottom, some of the sections around Lot F and in the West End, we still are in the process of updating as some of the conveyance solutions in West End are being developed and refined, and also as parking Lot F and some of the Ellicott Mills conveyance is being developed for Lot F. So this drawing is still a work in progress. As we look at Lower Main and the riverfront as this first area, many of you have seen this diagram online, this image. And so as we look at the channel expansions, we were charged with looking at, okay, if we widen this channel in Lower Main, how can it become an amenity for in an integral part to Ellicott City, where we see several opportunities. And first of all, I want to say any of the illustrations you're seeing are representing design intent. There's still a lot of back and forth with detailed modeling to see what works, what doesn't work, how do we shift steps or terraces one way to get the water to flow. So this is representing design intent, not a final design. So there's an opportunity to create this. This could be amenity, both visual and physical. There's opportunities for historic interpretation and flood mitigation interpretation, new commercial viability along Tiber Alley and Lower St. Paul Street, and then also opportunities to expand some of the sidewalks along Lower Main Street. And we're doing this with an understanding that this will not replace the buildings that are going to be removed. We can't replace that character. This will be a different character, and our job is to look at how can this really be an integral and vibrant part of the community. We also have some design realities that we're facing with this. This cannot be a naturalized stream channel through here. It's going to be primarily hard surface. We may have some limitations on using some of the existing bedrock for the surface of the channel. We're running into that. Matt is working on the Ellicott Mills area, and we're running into some of those issues up there. There is on a daily basis, a limited base flow. It's not going to be big, a wide, vibrant river. It's going to be 3 to 6 feet maybe on a daily basis until obviously when there's high water. And then maintaining the hydraulic capacity while functioning as an amenity space is something that we need to consider. So the function has to really be considered, not only the form, and then some of the culvert openings that we're dealing with. Some of the other realities is balancing historic interpretation with hydraulic function. We have the constriction at Maryland Avenue. The existing constriction is a real constraint, so we have to deal with that, and the double double culverts that are being planned will help deal with that. There's always the potential for debris. The modeling results that we have seen in the modeling are only as good as we can keep those channels functioning the way they're supposed to. If they're clogged with debris, if the culvert openings are clogged with debris, they're not going to function the way the model depicts. So we got to be aware of that. And then maintaining the appropriate scale. There's a very unique human scale to that part Lower Main right now. It's obviously going to change with the removal of those buildings, but how do we maintain some of those elements, or how do we incorporate some of those elements of human scale, and then also making it accessible. If it's an amenity, it has to be accessible. There's some key considerations for design. Ellicott City really matters. The historic value is very important. There's important stories to tell, so we want to make sure we convey that the best way possible, and would love to hear more input on opportunities for that. It's appropriate that it's important that a historic interpretation happens appropriately, that it's not kind of a cheap imitation, that it's done thoughtfully. There needs to be a sensitivity to the context of how the reuse of building materials and reconstruction of buildings are done. We need to really consider that context. The building by building structural evaluation will determine what materials are salvageable and reusable, but we don't want to preclude the use of things. We don't want to preclude the potential use of facades. We know there's concern for the structural stability of those, but are there portions that could be maintained? We want to make sure we keep options open, and we want to look at that human scale, and then also for providing shade for the usability of this space. Other considerations, life safety and flood hazard messaging, how that's incorporated for identifying pedestrian evacuation routes and high ground, accessibility, the channel flow to Maryland Avenue, and then creating multiple opportunities for interpretation and design. So I want to flash through some images. Before we get into the details of the plan, I want to just flash through some imagery of some of the things. No, not one of these really captures exactly what would be the situation in Ellicott City, but it's going to be a combination. This is in England of terraces and steps down to the river, China and South Korea, where a channel has become a pedestrian, an amenity space as well as a conveyance system. More local examples in Yonkers and Berkeley Springs, Slovenia, not real local, but just different examples of the walls, the materials, incorporation of planters and pots. We'd love to get as much vegetation in here as possible, but we have to realize it's not going to be a green, naturalized channel. Stone terraces, stone is such an inherent element here. How could we utilize that? And that brings us back to Ellicott City. What are some of the influences here that are important to capture? The bedrock, the stone wall, the terraces, the planting hanging over terraced walls, the fencing, the steps, architecture, opportunities to incorporate remnants of some of those buildings, and scale. And we see examples here at the typical fencing. There's already precedent of some remnants at the Patapsco Female Institute, the bedrock along Main Street, the steps and walls at Courthouse Steps. These are all things that we could play off. There's also interpretive opportunities. There's obviously the signage that could be done, which is very important, but there's many more, whether it's pavement markings or frame outlines of buildings, use of shade structures, and flood awareness. These are some examples of remnant walls that might be incorporated, whether it's foundation walls across the stream channel where buildings once stood, or pieces along Main Street that could be incorporated in the streetscape. Again, this all has to be evaluated. Or if existing foundation walls aren't possible to use, there might be new ways to interpret where building lines once were with different paving. Important facades and remnants of facades and buildings to keep, and how could they be represented possibly with frame outlines. This is the Ben Franklin House in Philadelphia, and a more recent example is Joplin, Missouri, where there was buildings impacted by tornadoes, and this is a memorial park. So and we're not saying at this point any one of these is the right solution. It's just a palette of options that we don't want to preclude the flexibility for doing some of these. Or it might be interpreted in a more artistic and contemporary way with building framing, or possibly even fiber optic lights. To maybe it's a temporary art installation where lights used to create outlines of buildings that were once there. Again, these all have to be detailed out and studied in detail. Shade is going to be important, so there might be shade structures that replicate some of the former roof lines that were there, or some of the building forms that were present. And then even interpretation of some of the flood levels, that this is a very active this is a community developed in a floodplain, and how do you create the awareness other than just signage? Boulder, Colorado had this Connect the Dots art program where throughout the town these blue dots represented high water lines, just to keep that awareness to the public that we are in an active floodplain. And then it's going to be important to incorporate site elements. We heard a lot of fear that this will look like the LA River, a big concrete channel. That's what we want to avoid. So what site elements? We want to try to incorporate trees as much as possible, but recognizing they could be a debris hazard. So we got to be very careful about that. But there may be opportunities for planters and pots and getting color. The fencing, whether it's the Ellicott City standard fence, or are these opportunities to use more creative fencing, more contemporary, or ways to incorporate and use the fencing for some interpretation and public art. Shade structures will be very important, whether they span large sections of the channel or certain areas. Some of the columns supporting these might also be columns that help keep debris from washing into the channel, or cars, or larger elements like that. And then surfaces, very important. What's the surface? This has to be a hard surface channel, concrete, but can we embed rock and boulder and stone into that concrete base to get patterns and something that's more visually appealing? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and different stone patterns to achieve. There may be opportunities to preserve some of the bedrock as the channels widen, or to recreate that with concrete. And then messaging, whether it's interpretive signage, messages for high water marks, again, to keep that visual awareness of where the flood levels would be. And then the messaging and preparedness. We talked a little bit about this earlier. How do we incorporate this into the overall design? So as we get into the channel design in a little more detail, we want to look at the first scenario is looking at a terrace channel. And I'm going to hit with... Okay, so this channel here, this is Main Street. This is where Kaplan's was. This is where Tiber Alley is right now. We're proposing that that might be a location for a pedestrian bridge. This Tiber Alley would still be intact right in here, Maryland Avenue, and then this is St. Paul Street here. So an opportunity we see is to create, maybe there's a broader plaza area at Main Street, street level where Kaplan's was, more of a gathering area at the Main Street level, incorporating some of the elements. These planters represent the window bays of Kaplan coming in. We want to have this accessible. This is a 5% ramp and stair system coming down here. With 5%, we can minimize the railings that we need to have here. These are broader terraces that come down. This is the location of T on the Tiber, possibly integrating some of those walls or elements of the wall, that becomes a gathering space in the area. And then this might be another ramp system that comes down. And where we're showing the paving, the rock embedded into the paving, the concrete that I showed some examples, they may be used subtle color differences that represent some of the building locations that were once there, and then also trying to incorporate green, some smaller trees along Main Street, some planter beds within the channel. This allows us, with widening this would allow us to create a wider area along Lower Main Street on the north side for sidewalk. We're proposing that the parking be removed along Lower Main and that there's drop-off and pickup and delivery zones, but the parking along here is removed because of the hazard of the cars in the way. It's very important that whatever the design of this incurs, we keep the ability for water to flow into the existing Maryland Avenue culvert as well as the new proposed culverts. So that's going to determine where we could have steps and terracing and the degree to which they can be. And again, there's a lot of back and forth design in the modeling. This is the cross-section that was included in the McCormick-Taylor model. On their modeling, it was a series of about 3-foot-high terraces that step down to the channel. This is in the vicinity of T on the Tiber and Shoemaker Country. And then we looked at, these are some crude model views. There's different ways we could look at this, whether it's the 3-foot terraces or a series of smaller terraces that allow you to get down into the space easier. It may be a series of steps, or in the bottom right, if the hydraulics indicate that we need to have a wider channel, it may be a broader channel at the bottom, like we saw in some of those examples from Korea and China, with most of the wall and grade change happening at Main Street and getting a wider sidewalk area there. So in cross section, this is just showing, ideally would love to have more terraces and steps that allow people to get down to the channel at different areas, and that's what's represented in this plan here that we just walked through. We had, during our MPAT advisory meeting, the question asked, well, what's the size of this? What's the scale? It is a large open space, so we have put that in comparison. So if you were to drop Lot F on top of the Lower Main channel, that's the size of it. So just for a scale comparison of that area. We've done a series of perspective views because I think it's difficult to see it in plan view. This is standing over, if you're over St. Paul's Church, up on St. Paul's Lane, looking to the northeast on Main Street. So this is looking at how that open channel would be. You can start to see with the opportunity with the pavement color or subtle changes in the pavement to indicate where buildings were, incorporating some foundation walls that might extend across a stream channel or lines that represent that. Again, there's a number of ways to represent that. An important feature too is, in terms of life safety, we're showing a bridge in this location. The most useful bridge benefit would be in the Kaplan's area, but that comes into a high hillside. We're showing potential ramping and steps up to St. Paul Street. The bridge here may have to be at a high enough elevation to allow the floodwaters underneath, so it may require some ramping and stairs in this area or even an elevator. And so if there's a structure there, that might support some other structures that could represent the facade of the building that was there. And so this is showing, just dropped in very subtle, like this could be, we saw some of those those outlines of buildings. There might be an opportunity for the Kaplan's with the Kaplan sign, where it once stood, the T on the Tiber, and this is the Bean Hollow, the Art Deco facade of the lower level. So again, that's just showing how some of those elements could be incorporated in, not determining which ones they are at this point. This is another view looking from looking in the other direction towards St. Paul Street. Again, getting a sense of the ramp up to St. Paul Street from the Kaplan's area, and then some of the broad, the channel. Where, as you could see, we're in the lower section of this, we're minimizing the number of terraces and steps and obstructions. This is where water flow would need to get under the new culverts and then also into the existing culvert. But as the detailed design occurs and the detailed modeling occurs, be able to look at and experiment with how much changes we can actually incorporate in there. We can't determine that right now. And then this is just a crude model view of looking south toward or east toward the B&O, the Kaplan's, of how the Kaplan sign could be relocated here as part of the facade outline, and then some of the other facade outlines along the streetscape as well. And then this is the view that I think many of you have seen. Again, this is a design intent, not a final design, but getting an idea of the surfaces, the textures and surfaces, trying to minimize railings within this zone as much as we can, minimizing obstruction. So the hydraulic modeling will really determine exactly what we can do in terms of steps and terraces and walls. That's just fading in. The bridge would like to have a bridge at the location where the Tiber Alley currently crosses over. And then we need to recognize that it's not always going to be filled with a concert and a festival and a lot of people. And that's why it's important that this look good when it's not filled, that the textures and surfaces and the design has a visual and aesthetic appeal as well as a functional one. And then this is just showing, again, how some of those structures might be replicated with the frame outlines, or there might be awnings or shade structures incorporated them as well to mimic some former roof lines. The second scenario we're showing is really looking at, well, what if we, for the purpose of hydraulics, that has to be a much wider channel and we can't have all the terracing. So we're still, would still like to try to get a gathering area near the Kaplans, but a ramp that 5% that follows the edge of Main Street, maybe some stairs here, but really minimizing a lot of the terracing and the steps to really maximize that channel. Again, this would be determined in the detailed design. A view, the same views looking at that approach. So what this would show a much wider area at the Main Street level, so it would have more gathering and pedestrian area at Main Street level than probably a 6-foot wall down into this space. Still opportunities to access it, but not as many as we were showing in the earlier sketch. And again, the texture, the scale, the design of this becomes very important. Also looking at the streetscape, there's an opportunity for sidewalk expansion on the north side of Main Street. As we said, would look at that as really primarily parking and drop-off and delivery. The modeling shows in the shear stress that brick paving is not good, so we need to do concrete paving. We'd want to integrate flood warning systems into the streetscape, wayfinding, and placemaking. And so on the north side, this is an example where we could have the drop-off pickup zone, some expanded sidewalk area that could support some of the restaurants and cafes over there. We're looking at that drop-off pickup zone being raised the sidewalk level with a mountable curb, so it could be expanded for more sidewalk area during festivals and events. We talked about this last year at the movable bollard, that most of the time it functions as a drop-off area, but then that bollard we could use a potted plant or something else to move it out, and that becomes extended sidewalk area during events. And then in those areas where you have the permanent bump outs, we have wider sidewalk and could accommodate outdoor dining that you see here. Further up on Main Street, we could have the ability to have some possibly on-street parking as well as delivery and drop-off, and incorporating some of those bump outs for around utility poles. The paving would be, and that's further up in, this is Lower Main down here and further up here, where at least would recommend that if in the interim that you do allow for parking to occur here, or if parking is not permitted in the interim until some of the other flood mitigation occurs, allow the flexibility that could be added after some of that mitigation is put in. And again, showing the condition where we have the width, do the mountable curb and flexible parking zone, and then in other areas it would be just the traditional parking zone. Paving, scored concrete, but something, here's some examples of where it's done well in other historic districts. And then as we look at Maryland Avenue, we shared some of these concepts earlier in March. We're looking at Maryland Avenue treated as, again, a flexible use space that most of the time it functions with parking, but raise that parking level up to sidewalk area so that you could also have those as flexible spaces for food trucks and other events, and expanded sidewalk area. And there's some examples in other communities where that parking or drop-off zone is raised up to sidewalk level, and it becomes a little more flexible for when you have larger events and festivals. An important part of the streetscape will be wayfinding signage, again using the Ellicott City brand to incorporate into the wayfinding signage. Also, another recommendation is looking at, with the exposure of those facades, the rear facades in St. Paul Street, improve potential a rear facade grant to make those now very visible facades more attractive, more usable, and viable for some commercial uses, especially those businesses on Tiber Alley and the lower end of St. Paul Street, to help activate the widened channel. And that may include the top left image is on St. Paul Street looking down in the vicinity of Kaplan's, but there may be some opportunities for terraces and overlooks if some of those buildings are repurposed for active uses. I'm now going to move into some of the concepts we talked about earlier in March. The Patapsco Riverfront is really a great opportunity, and we're showing, I'll zoom in. We talked earlier about parking lot A as an opportunity for a structured parking. We will have a lot of demand still in Lower Main, and this is the best opportunity to create that. There's been a lot of conversation. We know plans in the works for establishing the trolley number 9 pedestrian bridge across the river. That could be a real asset. And with the creation of a parking resource, expanded parking resource in Lot A, that might be allow long-term a portion of Lot B to be converted into a riverfront park. This is the only area really accessible to the Patapsco River in Ellicott City. Again, we see this as a long-term recommendation once other parking resources are developed. We also see the opportunity for this pedestrian bridge across the Patapsco, where the trolley bridge once occurred. It really should be a signature design bridge. Other communities, Greenville, South Carolina, the bridge is an attraction in and of itself, and especially, people parking in Lot A and coming over to Lower Main, if it's an attractive, enjoyable experience, they could really engage with the river in that environment, and that distance won't be so critical. It could also be a venue for public art, as I said, an attraction in and of itself. And this is a sketch view showing Lower Main and how that bridge and parking deck on Lot A might all work together in a future park in Lot B along the riverfront. All these pieces start to come together to create a vibrant Lower Main Street. As we move up the hill to Upper Main and Hudson Bend, this was a concept we talked a lot about last year. Really hasn't changed a whole lot. Just a reminder, this is Lot D. Lot E is right here. This is relocating the brewery annex building, removing the La Palapa portion of the building here so that this stream channel can be widened and it becomes a terraced amenity space in Lot D, and then a parking structure wrapped with development that could have active mixed uses that accommodate some of the relocated businesses as well as new businesses, and start to activate that open space. This is the existing view. We're kind of up on Merriman's Lane looking back into Lot D, and then the proposed view of how that could look. It'd be very important that if a parking structure occurs here, that be wrapped with development, that there's some revenue generated, but more importantly, that there's active uses activating this open space. And here's some examples of kind of the scale of buildings. Many of these are buildings that are actually wrapping a parking deck. The bottom center building is a bank facade that was relocated and applied to a deck in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we've heard conversation about potentially locating some of the former facades to this parking deck. If that's done, that has to be done very carefully. Not all the facades would be appropriate for that. And if it is, it really can't just be a kind of a two-dimensional applique to the parking garage. It really has to be integrated with the design, so it may or may not be appropriate. This is a view looking at Lot D, again from the air, and then how that Hudson Bend and the integrated development might incorporate in there. Again, it's very important this be an innovative design, really done well with an eye towards developing in an urban district, not a more typically suburban area like the rest of the county. So phasing strategy, the parking phasing will be very instrumental in this. We talked earlier about we'll be working between lots A, D, and F and a potential temporary shuttle, looking at how we could phase all of that. I'm not going to get into the great details, but there's some exciting opportunities with shuttles. The top is a 10-man shuttle, a privately operated one in Greenville, South Carolina. We're showing down in the bottom how the branding could be applied to one here in Ellicott City. It should really be a branded, something that's fun to use, something small. And Jim Burnett from our team has done some research now. There's low-speed autonomous vehicles that are being used as 10-man shuttles. Some in Detroit, Las Vegas has experimented with these. And so there's opportunities to look towards something like this in Ellicott City. We also see, we've been working with Rec and Parks. The Heritage Program Center will be moving to the Bernard Fort House, and this will really manage EC as a heritage district. So we're looking at how this could be incorporated into the overall planning. There'll be gallery spaces, program offices, some parking, and then pathway connections to other parts of Ellicott City. This is Lot F. This is the current the footprint before the May flood of Lot F. We had always been recommending that it be consolidated and pushed a little further to the north to open up room in this area, and now it's very important for the channel expansion. But we're also relocating the log cabin. We identified a couple locations where that might locate. We think this location might be the most suitable. It puts it along the pathway network and also in the vicinity and part of this campus for the Bernard Fort House. We also see opportunities at long term. This is showing parking lot F as a surface lot with the widened channel through just underneath Ellicott Mills. We see a long-term potential that might be a 3-level deck, accessible from 3 different levels at grade, so it's really not extending maybe only 4 feet above Ellicott Mills Drive. And then the second floor could be wrapped with potential studio space, an artist or co-work space that we've seen in other communities. There could be green walls incorporated. This could be a very innovative signature deck, highly visible. And this is an example of a parking structure in Greenville that's wrapped with studio space developed along there. And this is a current plan that Matt's working on with the county on the widened channel from Ellicott Mills Drive on behind the wine bin down to Hudson Bend. As we move to West End, there are several projects underway. The culvert enlargement in the vicinity of West End Auto, dealing with some of the constriction points here. We'll be updating this graphic to include the details of that project as that's developed further. And then also further to the east on Main within the West End, looking at areas where we have constrictions and how we can get water from Main Street back into the channel. So these areas are being studied right now by the county. We're also looking at street improvements for Main Street, crosswalks, traffic circle at Rogers Avenue. We talked about this back in March. Bump outs, and the crosswalks would be raised for traffic calming purposes, and then identifying where parking areas occur along West End. We have a lot of issues with speed along West End Main, so we want the traffic calming. And I did start 15 minutes later, Chris. 11 minutes later? Okay. Did your 1 minute take that into account? Okay. So here we are in West Main. I'm almost finished. A before and after view of how that traffic calming crosswalks and parking and some bump outs could be incorporated there. And then we talked about this the last time too, a long-term opportunity for the West End Auto should that property owner ever want to resell his property or redevelop it. And we're calling this Central West End. So West End Auto's located right here. Some of the plans right now as part of the flood mitigation are to improve and open up this channel that's currently underground. But long term, there's an opportunity for more park space and then more flood mitigation within this area, that the lowest part of the site, and then move up the hill. And there's some opportunity for some infill to make that the sale and reuse of this property economically viable. And then also incorporating any redevelopment of that site is important to look at the pedestrian network and how that ties into connections of the Roger Carter site and on into the Barnard Ford House, Hudson Bend, and other parts of Ellicott City. There's opportunities for some of the buildings that might remain to use maker spaces. There's a burgeoning art community and makers community in the West End. We see a real opportunity for that here and really distinguishing this district from the core of Ellicott City. We talked about Courthouse Hill the last time. This is going to be an RFP will be going out for the redevelopment of the courthouse. This is the existing courthouse, the courthouse parking lot. The actual uses will be determined as part of that RFP process, but it would include adaptive reuse of the courthouse building, and then hopefully some active uses wrapping any kind of parking structure, on-site stormwater management, and that currently does not exist right now. It would be very important, while we're not going to dictate the design in the master plan, some things that are very important to identify. It should be an innovative design. There really has to be conscious of its interface and connectivity with the Patapsco Female Institute, Mount Ida, the connection to Main Street, have a clear site organization around a street network. So this is Court Street, the historic courthouse is right here. There should be a real strong organized street network, possibly permeable paving or something, a surface parking area that could also service as an open space and keep views open to Mount Ida. If there's a parking structure, that there's possibly even at an upper level pedestrian bridge connection over into the hillside to the Patapsco Female Institute. So again, the RFP will outline some very specific criteria that needs to be considered. And then as we look at the broader watershed, some of the recommendations that we've been talking about, pedestrian connectivity along Frederick Road out to the library, along Old Columbia Pike, better pedestrian connectivity, green infrastructure as part of the Office of Emergency Management's green infrastructure plan that every resident and property owner can get involved in and participate. And then we talked earlier about the Tiber-Hudson Special Protection District that will start to look at stormwater requirements and how that's dealt with. And very importantly, debris management and channel maintenance plans. Debris management, we have a lot of areas, especially along the new cut, large trees right at the edge that they're being undercut. Now, there's a lot of perception that, oh, these roots are good, they're holding in the embankment. This just creates hazard. As these are continuously undercut, those trees end up in places like this. And so a long-term strategy for some stream restoration, conscious removal of trees. They might be a healthy tree, but they could be in a very vulnerable location. So how do you strategically remove trees so they don't become debris? And then how do you replant that area with herbaceous material, smaller trees that still has a root mass, but more appropriate for that floodplain in the valley. Looking at creating log snares to help create debris from washing down. Further up in the watershed, these might be old tree trunks or logs that are inserted vertically into the ground to capture some of that debris. As you get closer down into the core of town, it's going to have to be something much heavier duty. That might be Core 10 steel beams, and none of these examples are actually debris catchment, but it's just giving the idea of beams that are inserted into the ground that could catch some of the heavier duty, the boulders, cars, anything that's strong washing down. And this is just a crude SketchUp model showing how these could be inserted into the stream channel. This is looking down the new cut towards Old Ellicott City, vertically inserted in to catch the debris. the debris washes to the side and the water flows through. If it's a particularly scenic area, the tributary, there might be opportunities to incorporate overlooks or pedestrian bridges across the stream with those structures. And they would really happen throughout the watershed at various points along the new cut and then the other channels to keep that debris from coming down into the channel. As I said, the channels are only as strong, only effective as they can be maintained to function as they should. So, how did I do, Kristen? All right. So we're open now for discussion. I'll turn it over to Val.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm going to say something that, my high school speech teacher told me never to say, which is apologize for the length of the presentation. Sorry that it took so long, but, I got a telephone call and somebody asked me, could you explain the Ellicott City Master Plan in an email to me? As you can see, it is very complex. It's involved. It's very detailed. So with that, we're going to open it up to feedback from you. Anybody who has a question or comment, please come up to the microphone. You can line up. And we also have staff who are going around the room. If you'd prefer not to come up to the microphone, just write your question, comment down, hand them into staff. And so we'll try to get through as many questions and comments as possible. And with that, I'll turn it over. If you could just give your name and where you live.
Bruce Taylor. I live in Baltimore County, but I spend most of my time in Howard County for the last 40-some years. So I want to thank the county and all the people who have participated, including many of the residents and owners who have participated in the project, to get this very detailed presentation, which is very impressive and very thorough. I want to share 13 additional ideas with you, some of which some of you have heard before, that I think could be additional food for thought in this process. We've talked about widening the Tiber, which is necessary in the floodplain area. Excuse me, but we also need to deepen it. We need to dredge it. Under the 8095 building, it used to be about 10 foot from the bottom of the building until you got to the riverbed. It's now probably closer to 7 feet. You can stand there and reach up and touch the building, which you could not do before. So I'm hoping that that can be part of the application that's made. In the broader sense, in the wake of these tragic floods that we've had and the loss of life, I understand the desire to blame flooding on development, and I encourage people to think again and look back at the data in the HNH study of McCormick Taylor. And when you look at the severe rainfalls that we've had, some of the numbers there indicate that development caused perhaps as little as 20% of the flooding and perhaps as much as 50%, depending on how much rain you got. Either way, the development we're talking about that caused that is primarily development, to remind people, that was prior to 1984 or whenever modern quality and quantity standards came in. And so I want to remind people that, at least in my mind, as an owner of property, both on Main Street and above Main Street, where I'm kind of uniquely situated to think about both ends of the problem, that modern development, where we're being asked to control quantity and quality with 8.5 inches of water being retained over 24 hours on property, is part of the solution to flooding of Ellicott City, not part of the problem. And that development shouldn't be delayed, it should be fast-tracked so that we can have these projects retain more water on site to keep it out of the city altogether. In terms of thinking about redevelopment of the courthouse, for a developer like myself to think about what might I do or offer in an RFP, I need to have plans of the courthouse. And there needs to be some way perhaps to do that that's sensitive to the security needs of the existing court system. But to be able to do something meaningful, people need to know areas, square footages, where the structures are, where the structural supports are that you can't pull out if you want to do something with the building. So just a thought about that. Some of you have seen before a plan that I wrote about in the Daily Record, the Alexander Concept Plan that Don Ruhr and myself put together with Charles Alexander, local architect. And I'm delighted that pieces of that plan are kind of coming together in their own way through the county's plan. Of course, the plan that we came up with is not the county plan, just to remind people. But Charles Alexander came up with what I thought was an excellent idea that I think can really lend itself well to the riverbed concept and the problems that you're experiencing with the South Tunnel and giving up on the South Tunnel. And this idea stemmed initially from an idea which was that we would like to create, and when I say we, I should say residents who live in Taylor Village, in the community that I helped create on College Avenue, which is now about 1,000 strong, have expressed a desire to be able to walk to Ellicott City. And we felt that that was not going to be too feasible on College Avenue, but it is feasible along Newcut Road. And we've come up with some ideas about how to create a walking path from Taylor Village to Ellicott City. And we were looking at crossing from Newcut Road at St. Paul Street over to Old Columbia Pike and having a walking bridge. So Charles Alexander took that idea and expanded it and said, no, let's take down Linwood's, which I own a part of, where the store is now. Let's take down a couple of the houses on St. Paul Street, which I also own, and let's make that a road. And now we have a giant traffic circle for Ellicott City where we can make it one way from Maryland Avenue to Old Columbia Pike, and one way from Old Columbia Pike over this new road that I'm going to call Alexander Drive in honor of Charles, onto St. Paul Street and down to Maryland Avenue. That would allow us to eliminate the traffic lights at Maryland Avenue and Main Street and the traffic light at Old Columbia Pike. And in conjunction with doing that, this bridge that we're talking about to join from Newcut Road to Old Columbia Pike with a road on it could be part of a diversion structure that would be your south pipeline that would then go under St. Paul Street. And we're talking about an elevation now that's about 164 feet, I think, coming down so you could go lower under the railroad tracks and avoid that tail end problem that you talked about. So that could be something that could be maybe in 2 phases.
Say, Bruce, I know that it sounds like you're going to go through the entire list of all 13 items.
I'll summarize real quick.
That would be great.
30
I mean,
seconds.
you could hand them in.
I will do that, too.
We've seen the Alexander plan and are well aware of it, so.
Some people here may not have heard about these ideas, which is partly why I wanted to spend a little bit more time on it. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there and I'll just turn the rest in. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so, yes, sir.
I have a short question. In terms of erosion mitigation on the south upper end, behind at West End, there's some open space behind the houses and so forth, and we've been talking about doing some erosion mitigation of the riverbed there for the Tiber. Is there any consideration of that in this plan?
Mark, is that something? I get a sense that a lot of the technical questions will be directed towards you.
So the short answer is yes. So there is concept plans out there that we would enhance the channel that's behind the properties on the West End, north side of the West End, and try and, instead of, it's a lot of times the Hudson branch is going into a pipe. It's in a channel, it does okay, then it has to go through a pipe, it doesn't do well, it pops out, hits the road. And so that's part of the conveyance. We'd like to see the majority of the Tiber branch, not Tiber, but the Hudson branch, we would like to see that daylighted and limit the amount of pipes. And we're well aware that there's a lot of channel work that needs to be done on the north side at the West End.
Anyone? We've got a lot of comments and questions, so go right ahead, though.
So a lot of this seems to be from the top-down flooding issue. Has there been any thought about, I know there's a current hold on development around Ellicott City, but what about a hold or a ban on development to the tributaries that go into the Tapsco further down south? Because that would bring in flooding from the top, or from the bottom up. So right now in Elkridge, there's a lot of building, and then there's a deep run that's going to back up and cause all sorts of flooding there. So is there anything that's in the works about there's stopping of the development down south?
There's nothing in the works, no moratorium that's been considered further downstream. From an engineering perspective, Mark, I don't know if the Department of Public Works has looked at that stretch or not.
Not in the detail that we have for the Ellicott City portion, but we are aware of issues. We are aware of issues in Elkridge and in frequently flooded roads that we have in the Elkridge area. And so, but to date, nothing as extensive as what we've done for Ellicott City. We haven't done anything as extensive yet.
So I don't know how many additional people want to stand up at the mic, but anybody who has questions, comments, if you could just line up, that way I get a sense of, how many of these cards we'll be able to get to. So be my guest.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name's Melissa Holtz, and I'm a resident of Ellicott City since 2000. I just want to say that I really have just recently engaged in this process, but I've certainly been aware of the city for a long time. And I just want to think that this plan is really a very good plan. And it has echoes of Frederick, which is a lovely town, not so far away, and has managed the water that runs through the town very well. It's very attractive, has a lot of beautiful features, and is a great draw for the local community. I particularly like the new plan that was in the newspaper, which you showed tonight, and would look to see as much greenery added to it as possible. The clock, I'd love to see the clock come back, and have a very nice riverfront walk area. I highly support the core goal, the #1 core goal of safety of people. People's lives are more important than buildings. I think we should all view this as an opportunity. We all know that the rivers will rise again, and it is important that the Ellicott City residents and visitors continue to stay alive as well.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening. My name is Bert Wilson. Like Mr. Taylor, I'm uniquely situated too. I have a building on Lower Main Street, and I live up on the Watershed on Old Columbia Pike. And we watched new development be done with no stormwater mitigation right across the street from us. I think what needs to happen and be addressed in the plan is a peak rain mitigation for new development, and not 8.5 inches in 24 hours. That's nonsense. And I think something other than the 100-year flood needs to be addressed. And otherwise, I like the plan. I think it's very well thought out. What are you going to do for other than 100-year flood measurement?
So I can address it briefly. Mark can go into the details. So we're well aware that is part of the exercise that we need to go through. So it's one of the obligations that the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning and Zoning develop a strategy for the broader watershed that looks exactly at the kinds of things that you're touching on here. We actually have a deadline. May 2019 is when we're supposed to come out, with a formal recommendation that will most likely result in changes either to engineering manual requirements. It could affect, subdivision and zoning regulations as well. But, Mark, I don't know if there's...
So, Bert, you and I have talked about this several times, and I think Val points out well that, we are looking at that right now, and what are we going to do differently in the watershed? We have to balance it because some ideas make a lot of sense geographically, might make a lot of sense in the lower area or in Ellicott Historic District, but if we want to be regulation-based, is it going to be the entire watershed? And so, or is it just going to be spots? And, so we want it to be as uniform as possible throughout the watershed. So it's going to take, we have started already sitting down, trying to analyze how we're going to approach this. So I would just say, I think the concept of looking at it differently is the one that I really take away
Yeah.
from what you're saying, and we will do that.
Good. Okay, that's what I'm.
Thank you. Don't be shy about lining up, so.
The one thing is that people want to hear you better, so if you can speak up. If people are having a hard time hearing, so if you can reiterate, that'd be great. Try to speak up.
Yeah, unfortunately with that mic, you have to pretend you're a lounge singer and really get in close.
Oh, I can do that. Hi, I'm Ron Dybert. I really love a lot of the aspects of the plan, Lower Main Street and the trolley bridge and the park down there. I live on Old Columbia Pike, maybe a few hundred feet from Lot D where that big parking garage is proposed. So I'm not extremely keen about the idea of a parking garage there, but I understand the need for it. And if it has to happen, I would just hope that the facades are historic looking. Can they be stone facades and make to be in context with the rest of town?
Okay, good, thank you. I think you're going to have to adjust down just a bit.
I'm Eli Woodruff. I live on 8611 Main Street in the West End, and I would like to know how the master plan affects traffic on all of Main Street and what is being done to address the speeding problem.
So that was a good question, the traffic on Main Street and the speeding problem. So I went through it pretty quickly in the presentation, but on West End of Main, where we heard, we didn't hear as many in all our meetings, a lot of speeding in the core of Ellicott City, but on West Main, that's where we heard a lot of speeding. So we are looking at curb extensions, raised crosswalks, multiple crosswalks located throughout the length of the street, and they would actually be raised up to sidewalk level, so cars have to slow down to get through them. A traffic circle at Rogers Avenue also will, as people come into the district, it's really at a point where the speed limit changes, so it's a visual cue that you're coming into a new district and a different district, and that will help slow down traffic as well. Jim, do you have any other thoughts that we pretty much hit? So.
Yes, sir.
Well, no, I'm not here to talk about the, I don't need that mic.
All right.
I think everybody can hear me.
It's the TV
Because I'll tell you who
viewers.
I am.
It's the TV
First of all,
viewers.
I'm ambassador of the Lord Jesus Christ, and I know how to speak. I just want to ask this people and all of these people in here, are you familiar that the Ellicott City Historical District, the most people that live there were the black community? And from Omar Jones up until the county executive now, outside of Charlie Miller, he put a development up there on Mount Ida. And he had a piece of paper that after 5 years they could buy. But then they changed it and made it out of a Section 8 and deprived those people of becoming homeowners. I lived there. I was born down there on that street, Fells Lane, in the 30s. You understand? And if you're familiar with that commercial, you know, I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. I know about racism. You understand? I know about racial injustice. And that what was done to the people on Mount Ida. It was racial injustice. And you want to know why? And they told the people that if they would move that community up there, that black community, they could make the business thrive down in the historical district. So what they did, they moved those people where I was born and raised at, you understand? They moved them out. You go down there now, and you could count on your hands the black people that live down there now. And I could give you many that lived there before. See, you talking about making a parking lot bigger for the tourists and everything. Huh? But then you're going to deprive people of becoming homeowners. These people would have been homeowners. They would have been able to send their children to college and things. But yet, you deprive them with this racial injustice. See, you don't have to tell a thief when to steal it, because they know it. You understand? And a lie will never be the truth. And the truth will never be the lie. So the truth of this county needs to see that these people get their part of their community back. That's what you need. I'm here because my mother raised us. We had 12 children. She didn't allow us to speak of racism. You understand? It was 12 of us. The first three oldest died in their 90s, and the rest of us in their 70s and the 80s. You understand? So I know, but I know we were taught back to the old grade, you understand? The Lord will take care of it. You understand? See, vengeance is mine. That water didn't come down Frederick Road and Main Street until 2011. It came up, and it went up far as petticoats. Well, you people don't know what petticoats, you understand? But I tell you what you better do, because I'm a believer. You understand? And I know God will prevail. And I don't care what structure you man build, they'll never stop the power of God. You understand? And that water came down, and they said they're going to stop those people. They want to get that black community out of there where the business can strive. So you got the black community out of there, but you didn't stop the water from coming down. See, we need to judge our hearts. And you got to learn how to love people. You understand? I don't want to confuse you. None of you, you know? Because I've been black all my life. You understand? And I know what it is black. I went in the service right after the Korean War, stationed down in Camp Lejeune. The flag represented me while I was on the base, but when I got off the base, the flag didn't represent me. And it's still the same now. See, you may not believe, but I know prayer go a long way. And
Thank you.
want to just say, I just wanted to make my statement.
I appreciate
And
that.
I tell you, and if you come down on Frederick Road, we've been living in a house for 60 years. You're going to see signs up there, been up there since 2025 about the justice. Because I put one up there and it said that Mount Ida was the last plantation because the white man moved it. because he had control over it. And he moved those people and stopped those people. Those people used to live, and they had outhouses. You understand? And they, first time they ever had inside facility. My house, my father, he put a bathroom in there, and he took a woodshed and made a kitchen out of it. You understand? Outside of the bar, they're the only one. You even had whites that had outdoor houses.
Sir,
You gotta look at one another.
I really,
You gotta care for one another.
I appreciate that.
I know.
I'd be happy.
Don't worry, because if y'all give me this whole hall, you understand, I'll preach you a sermon.
I believe that. I believe that. Thank you.
It's a little hard to speak. My name is Connie Siegel. I'm from Ellicott City. I just wondered if there had been any option thought of having, instead of removing all the buildings at the end of Main Street and allowing the water to flow down a terraced idea as you've shown, to have a lower structure or an open area under possibly the existing buildings raised up or their facades reconstructed, and allow that like a viaduct type of system, if there's an option for that at all.
I don't know if you guys would like to talk about the options. There was an option that looked at, flowing through buildings, so I'm not sure who's the best to answer that.
We could talk about it briefly. I mean, it was an idea. So we had several iterations of how to configure Main Street, and what we were really trying to do with the overall goal of lowering the floodwater elevations and also diminishing the velocity, the water velocity during the flood. And so through the model, there was at least 17 different iterations or configurations that we evaluated. Some of those iterations also had a B through A, B, C, D component. So there were more than 17 iterations. But what we started, and one of the iterations was, well, and if I understand the question, was, well, why don't we just let water pass through the first floors? And so we would elevate the structures, and so they would have second floors, but they wouldn't be first floors, and floodwaters could go through there. So we did look at that option, and we simulated, and we showed this actually at the council hearing. But we showed where the piers would be to support the buildings, and then put the July 30th storm through it to see how it would react. And so it was one of the iterations, but we found that we could get the lowest amount of water and the lowest velocity of water with what we now know as 16C inside the county, but which is really the 5-year plan. So, like I said, we went all the way through 17 iterations, probably really about 20 to 23 iterations. So that was one of them, and I want people to know that. And I have also seen where others have said, well, why haven't you considered that? And we did consider that. It's in the report. It was in the presentations we made to the county. It was in the presentation that the executive and Councilman Weinstein gave to the council. So it was in all the graphics, and so it's in there. We still found, like I said, the conclusion was that we could get better. We could achieve the goal with the 5-year plan, with the options that we put together for that 5-year plan.
Is that working? I'm Joel Hurwitz. I live in Columbia. Continuing previous question, I've written on my Local Common Sense blog, if anybody wants to read, about a wall, which, talking to McCormick and Taylor, I'm not sure how many of your iterations, Mr. DeLuca, dealt with the wall. Because I got one of the public information answers that the existing channel is 30 feet by 8 feet, which is about 240 cubic feet per foot. And when you're putting all these tiers and steps, you're sucking up all the real estate. And I find it truly disappointing in the presentation that you made admissions that you hadn't done the math to find out what's going to work or not. So I find adding a hundred or so cubic feet with the widened channel is not materially going to improve anything, especially with the water coming from the new cut. I don't know how the plan is to keep the water just slushing out onto Main Street, especially with the admission that 6 feet of water could be on Main Street. The plan doesn't seem to deal with the debris from the cars flowing into the park. You mentioned bollards for, I guess, for events, but it seemed to me you need a 10 to 12-foot bollard in a flood event to keep the cars out. Also very disappointing is that none of these plans show the CSX culverts in any view of any consequence. In fact, anybody who's not familiar with that plan would even know much what you're talking about with the CSX culverts, which I support. But looking at the elevations, they're basically going to suck up all the real estate at Maryland Avenue. You have these two 10-foot blowing culverts, which, how are you going to deal with one? If you put a grate, then you're going to block with debris. If you don't put a grate, the kids are going to run into it. Homeless people, like they live in Las Vegas, are going to be a problem. So I don't understand how you're dealing with these issues. You dealt with constructability issues, but you seem more interested in having a pretty park than actually working, as you, Mr. DeLuca, admitted in some of the previous, that you design for optimal, but then the storm doesn't do optimal. I like that the Alexander plan preserved the historic part of the T on the Tyburn. If you're going to put tiers, I don't know why we can't keep the historic part of the building there. And the same thing goes for the Phoenix. You're putting a plaza there. I don't know why you can't put the building top and put the culverts underneath it. So until I see workable engineering for how the Lower Main's going to work in a flood event with the culverts, and even some views showing the culvert of how the people are going to be functioning in this park standing next to this giant hole. At the same time, you're actually, somebody's concept plan is you're going to watch a band while you're standing in a stream. I can't believe that that's serious consideration. When we have a drought, there's not much water at all. People like Frederick, yes, they have more water apparently. But you need to plan for the flood, and when a couple summers ago we had no water, so it's going to be a dry, mucky thing with debris blowing into it. So, as I said, I really been looking for weeks for answers of how the culverts were going to be designed, how to preserve Maryland Avenue, even in the construction process, from a blowout, and to the B&O. So,
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
My name is Craig Stewart. I live in the historic district on Old Columbia Pike. I've lived in Howard County for 48 years. And when I first discovered Ellicott City, frankly, and that was in the 60s, Ellicott City, if you many know, was really a backwater. It was not developed at all. And actually, it was because of that fact that the historic preservation has been so successful, because it was not developed. If I had walked in, and I apologize, this is the first planning meeting I've been to, and maybe everyone in this room is familiar with the concepts that you presented tonight. I came here because I'm so concerned about the down to the bottom of Main Street in terms of the development near the B&O station, which you addressed. And then, for the first time, I have seen these concepts and these the renderings and so forth of the rest of Ellicott City. And maybe everyone else in this room is familiar with it. I am not. I saw it tonight, and frankly, my first impression is I walked into the wrong meeting. This must be a discussion about Columbia, Maryland. It can't possibly be historic Ellicott City. We're now proposing not one, but 3 parking structures, one off of Old Columbia Pike, one up around the courthouse, and then a third over by the Fells Lane with a commercial wrapper. Why are we considering commercial development in a historic district that's 247 years old? Why aren't we focusing on preserving and protecting the unique character of historic Ellicott City? If you want to do more intense commercial development, rightly so, it should be in Columbia or other areas, but I fail to understand the validity of the concept of imposing all this commercial development in a historic district. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Sullivan. I have a question about the master plan, and it has to do with many of us had high hopes for the north and south tunnels that were first identified in the HNH study, that they would eliminate the threat over time. Well, now it seems like we are scaling back a little on that, or at least losing faith in those 2 tunnels as a long-term solution even to eliminate the threat. The 5-year plan is going to mitigate the threat. It will not eliminate it, as we all know. So if it's not the 5-year plan to mitigate the threat, and it's not the north and south tunnels any longer, because it sounds like we've lost interest in those, what is the best hope to eliminate the 100-year flood threat in the lower end? It appears the backflooding we'll have the backflooding problem with the 5-year mitigation plan as well, just like we will with the south tunnel. So can somebody speak to why the north and south tunnels have lost their flair?
Well, I would say that, and what I said earlier about the south tunnel, is that it doesn't appear to, the feasibility of the south tunnel is in question. The north tunnel has issues about how it can be designed to function. And if we start, and when we impose these limitations on that north tunnel, how effective will it really be at eliminating floodwaters? That still needs to be addressed. But more so, I think that in the context of what we're really trying to accomplish in a 5-year period, with the majority, the most acute issues being addressed within the first year, the tunnel option is not something that we can accomplish. We can certainly analyze it further. And we're not saying that we're not going to do that. But what we're saying is that with this 5-year plan, we're addressing those acute issues as quickly as possible. It will take time. It will take time for that north tunnel to shake out, to see exactly how it can be designed to be effective. And so it's just outside of the 5-year period. But there are many problems that right now seem to be real challenges. And the first one is just the entrance to that tunnel. Because right now, conceptually, and it's worth noting again, and I know it was said before, but modeling is just, well, let's draw a line on a piece of paper, and then let's just shove it through the model and see what it can do. But it doesn't really address the reality of when you really try to put that creation in place. So, for example, we had a model that showed that, well, if you put a 30-foot diameter opening in the ground and you dropped it 39 feet down and then did a tunnel starting at 39 feet below grade and running it all the way down to the river, it's going to carry some water. Yeah. But I think that concept really needs to be fine-tuned. And what I would caution is that we look at a single solution and put all our eggs in one basket like that, spend 5 to 6 years trying to go through its feasibility, and then at the end of that 5 to 6 years realize we can't build it, or it's not going to really do what we thought it was going to do because we had to constrain so many things from the original idea. This 5-year plan, like I said, and I use the word acute, there are acute problems. And I think the 5-year plan within the first year starts to really get at a solution for those problems. And then in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, there will be a rollout of other projects that will really be effective. So in North Tunnel, I would say hasn't completely lost its luster, but I think that it can't be accomplished. It can't be accomplished in the time frame where we would like this immediacy. We want this immediacy. And so, I mean, I could go on and on about the North Tunnel. I just want to say that we're not, like at the end of 5 years, that's not it. That's the important point that you should take away also. At the end of 5 years, we're not done. We pack it up, we leave, and say, we just fixed Ellicott City. And that's not what we're going to do. But the 5-year plan does address those very immediate problems that need immediate solutions.
Hi, my name is Nana, and I'm actually not from Ellicott City. I'm from Virginia. I drove about like 2 hours, but I was curious about your numbers a little bit, your cost-benefit analysis, and I was surprised to hear that you consider removing buildings, putting them somewhere else, and how you determine your historic value of a building. Not just materials, but beyond that. And when it comes to, I think there was a comment earlier about removing the potential for more businesses to open with this Riverwalk. Do you have any plans for like non-permanent businesses, like food trucks or whatever, something that can come in like vendors, and I don't know if that was your idea for that Riverwalk area?
Well, again, I think the consultant team showed a number of images, specifically the area on Maryland Avenue that could accommodate food trucks. The notion of the expanded sidewalk, those could be wide enough to accommodate outdoor dining. They could, also accommodate, food carts, that sort of thing. So I think all of those ideas of a non-traditional, food delivery system, a restaurant, whatever you want to call it. I think those are part of the idea. To address though the question of, how the near-term plan addresses the removal of historic structures. We do have this group that's set up that is going to advise the county on the demolition and removal of historic structures, evaluating what their potential is for either relocation or reuse. So that's being considered. It's not something that has been included as part of a cost-benefit analysis. Our goals are clear that we need to address the situation in the near term, and as Mark described, there's a 5-year window here that we're trying to get into. And we understand that the choices are tough, but the overarching goal here is that of reducing risk in the downtown. I don't know, Mark, if there's more you could add. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Kay Robbins, and my husband and I are architects on Main Street. We have 4 buildings, and we've been in business on Main Street for almost 22 years. With the initial renovations of our building and then the 2011, 2016, and now the 18 flood, we could have purchased our buildings 3 or 4 times over for what we've put into them. So I feel like we're very heavily invested in this community. I love this community and I respect it. And I think that what you guys have done is very imaginative. I think the ideas show a lot of great ideas, and I am very appreciative for all the work that you have put into it, and I really support it. One of my first jobs, actually my first job out of architecture school many years ago, was working for the construction company that built the subway in Washington, and I was fortunate enough to work on the tunnel boring that went under the DuPont Circle Metro, which is one of the deepest ones in Washington. And I don't think people have any idea of how complicated it is to drill through a virtually granite valley. So when we talk about tunnels, you know, oh, let's just build a tunnel here or build a tunnel there. It's a tremendous undertaking, and I think that it's probably, as these guys are saying, something that might be down the line. But for right now, I would like a solution that means I don't have to rebuild these things every 2 years, and I appreciate these things that are going to be implemented right away. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Frank Durante. I've been a resident here for 30 years. And I think a couple people have brought this point tonight, but hasn't been to my satisfaction here. During these 30 years, I've seen the creek, the Hudson Creek, behind my house rise faster year after year because of one thing: development up the watershed. And I think you've heard a man that had been here for 60 years, that he hadn't seen that before 2011. If we don't stop development in this watershed, these plans here will fail. This is, to me, the most important thing to do. Development has caused these floods more than climate change. And I'm a believer in that, and I hope that your plan will totally include changing, stopping all these developments in this watershed, major developments. Is there any plans for that?
Well, I guess the reality is there currently is a moratorium in place. So development has stopped in the watershed. And as we described, the Department of Planning and Zoning, the Department of Public Works, we're going to be analyzing what kinds of development regulations need to be modified to address the issue of stormwater management. We're not at that point, so I can't answer your question. The other one, the fact that you're recommending a permanent moratorium of no development in the watershed, that's not a question that the Department of Planning and Zoning can answer. That comes through the county council. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that.
Yeah, after 2016, I think there was 5 developments that were allowed to go on. So, I hope it stops, because if it doesn't, we're going to build all this for nothing. Thank you.
I'm Tanya Lopez, and I'm resident of Ellicott City. I'm also licensed PE and water resource engineer. First of all, I truly want to thank you for all the work you are doing, because I'm on another side of the what is happening, and I'm just observing. And as an engineer, I know the extent of work which we put in just to come up with this, because it looks like the public doesn't really understand. And thank you so much. I'm really impressed with all of that. And my question is, talking about culverts, I was sitting in the office today and I was checking the culverts, the feasibility, and I came up exactly with the same solution. You cannot chase this even diameter of the tunnel for the rainfall event, because you may invest millions of dollars and then in 1 year a high frequency storm comes and we get flooded again. So but talking about culverts, I still see some culverts in your design, and I wanted to ask, what is the worst case tailwater are you designing that for? And is there any way to run the model for the worst case scenario, maybe what we experienced in 70s, which was flooding of Patapsco River, and analyze the safety and threatening to the public as far as this backtail water condition, and also just to check these culverts if they do not make the whole system, if they don't work backwards, so if they would not make the flooding worse.
So we haven't looked at a flood, a riverine flood. We haven't looked at like an Agnes storm like we had in '72. So we didn't look at that because the immediate problem, which has always been something that we've said, a lot of what we're addressing is the top-down storm.
Mm-hmm.
So we are sensitive to that. There isn't too much we can do in the way of conveyance or in the way of storage for a riverine flood, because we can't control floodwaters on the Patapsco.
That's correct.
So we know when they're going to happen. We have a better idea through our gauges that we have, and that type of flood is a lot more predictable. So we know when it's going to hit, how long it should be before it leaves, things like that. But right now there's no solution for that, and our analysis doesn't necessarily doesn't take that into consideration. Now, the culverts, many of the culverts we know since the 2011 storm, when we analyzed them, we know that they are, from the top down, we know that they're undersized. But there have been so many physical constraints that we haven't been able to do very much about the culverts. For example, we have properties that are adjacent on the right and the left of a culvert, and there is no opportunity for us to expand that culvert at all. So, but generally speaking, we've looked at the entire drainage system, the storm drainage system, to see how well that functions. And that is part of the plan to upgrade, because we've found deficiencies there. So we do have projects that will be upgrading those storm drain systems. And we're trying wherever we can to reconnect the streams with their 100-year floodplains. So that, that means widening them out. And that's a challenge, but that's something that what we're doing in the 5-year plan, what it tries to address. So it's a multifaceted approach for us. We're looking at storm drainage improvements in the existing communities that might be a little bit uphill, like on Rogers Avenue, places like that, Courthouse Drive. And then we're also looking at the stream conveyances, and we're trying to reconnect the floodplains, the natural floodplains that have been, the physical built environment has taken away from the streams.
Okay. Excuse me, for the pipes or tunnels which will outfall directly into Patapsco River, are you going to look at worst case scenario at least to check if they would not create the backup water?
Right.
Like, do you understand what I mean?
Right. Yes. So with all of our modeling, we're looking at the July 2016 storm.
Okay.
and testing everything we do. When we model it, we look at the July 16 storm,
Okay.
as well as other storms. But that is the worst case that we're using.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi there.
Hello. I'm William Bishop, and we have the 5-year plan, and we're looking at immediate solutions as soon as possible to alleviate further flooding. So I see this work being done now, which is great, up above Courthouse, Ellicott Mills Drive, so that the future flooding will not wash away the road. So now the construction is to build underneath with a tunnel to get the water through faster, correct? Not necessarily, but it's going to do it, okay? Because now you're funneling more water down past there faster, and you're getting down to Court Avenue. Now the water's going to funnel all down to that one little area with a little opening for the water to get through. So what to do about that? I mean, I have a building that's right there, and this last flood, the water came up to the ceiling in a basement apartment. That's 8 feet high. And it's going to happen again, and even faster. It's going to get higher, because now you're bringing water down faster to get there, and it's not going to be able to get through. So you need to do something with Court Avenue quickly to get that water through, not let it back up and be worse. You're creating a bigger problem for me by doing what you're doing up at Ellicott Mills Drive.
So I agree with your concept. You know, it's hard to start in the middle and
So
and then work everything
you're
out.
doing there now. The next one's going to be the culvert down at Court Avenue, right?
Mhm.
When would that be approximately? 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4
Yeah,
years?
it's within 1 to 2 years in what we've scheduled. In fact, the channel, you know, we're making modifications to the culvert at Ellicott Mills that will, and you know, before it was in a pipe, it was in a 9-foot diameter metal pipe that you have behind there. And then it would run into that channel behind your property. And then the biggest impediment was the Court Avenue culvert itself, because it was too small. And so, and
Exactly.
it all backs up. So, I mean, we realized that. Ideally, we would start at the end, at the Patapsco, and work our way up. And it's still what we want to do. So what we're doing at Ellicott Mills, at that culvert, it has the potential to carry the 100-year storm through that culvert. But that would be way too much to carry, and we understand that we would be flooding out all those properties, like you know, you've said. So what we've done is, realizing that we're in the middle, what we've done is we've choked down, we've allowed Ellicott Mills culvert to be choked down from a 100-year storm down to what it was, which was a 9-foot pipe, until we can finish Court Avenue culvert. Well, that's all considered part of what's known as the Hudson Bend, okay?
Yeah.
So we would finish that project. We would work from the bottom of the Tiber Hudson at the Patapsco River. We would work up. And hydraulically, when it makes sense, after we've finished enough projects, then we would take the constriction off of Ellicott Mills. And so then it would pass its water, you know, without any damage to the properties, without causing any additional damage to the properties.
But you're going to let enough water, pardon me, go underneath of the Ellicott Mills Drive to keep it from washing out the street again, right? That's what it's all about.
And the final, yes, in the final build out, okay? But we can't, but what's happening now is we're constricting it so that it's only allowing through what it allowed before. So until we can finish other pieces of the downstream improvements.
Yeah.
So hopefully what you'll experience is nothing more than what you would have experienced before, okay? And then when we do adjust or modify the stream downstream, then we'll take the constrictions off of Ellicott Mills.
And you estimate that will be about when that we'll get Court Avenue corrected? Underneath the Court Avenue, that culvert?
Yeah, I would say that it's with our planning today, it's within the 5-year plan.
Well, in other words, I'm going to wait 5 years then, probably. Could wait 5 years for that to happen.
I would say realistically, yes.
Very sad, thank you.
Mhm.
Our goal was, to get out at maybe 9:15, something like that. We can take a couple of additional questions. For those of you who wrote on the index cards, thank you very much. But I don't think that we're going to be able to get to those questions. What we're going to do is we're going to consolidate all of these things. We'll post them on our website, and we'll provide answers. So, sorry, but I counted, we've got like 25 questions just on cards alone.
Hi, my name is Nick Drummond. I am a junior architect in Baltimore. I grew up in Howard County. I just had a couple questions. One was, several challenges including high tailwater in the Patapsco and debris blockages were brought up as reasons why a south tunnel bore might not work. So my question is, how will those same issues affect the CSX culverts? And just to clarify, what will flood levels on Main Street be if the culverts are blocked or deemed infeasible to construct?
So the tailwater is an issue, all right? I think that when we're looking at the tunnels and we're expecting them to be the silver bullet that's just going to drain everything off of Main Street, then we have to look at, then that's where the scale of that project, that tunnel project becomes so large that, that things start to happen. So in the analysis, if the tailwater comes up, or if the top of that tunnel is blocked, then, and if that's the only thing that you're using, okay, to mitigate flooding on Main Street, well, you've lost it all.
Well, I don't think tunnels would be the only thing. I think they would just be part of a much larger plan.
So I agree with you. I think tunnels could be a part of a much larger plan. I think that, however, my feelings from, and not only mine, but, we have two engineering consultants that have independently looked at this, and the South Tunnel doesn't look as promising as a solution. The North Tunnel could be. How much contribution will the North Tunnel be? I doubt, because we will need to scale it back, I doubt that it'll be the silver bullet, so I just want to make sure that we just strike through that right away. It will supplement with all these other projects. It'll supplement. Now, the culverts at and Maryland Avenue, so the idea there is, this channel only, now I know why we're running overs, because I'm talking too much. So, yeah. But I think that what's going on, the reality of the situation is that these tributaries, these branches, the Tiber, the Hudson, the New Cut, they're all joining together, and they only go through one culvert at the end of Maryland Avenue, and I can't remember the dimensions off the top of my head, but it's not big. And then we have the constriction with the CSX bridge, which it has to fit through the arch. So, I mean, that's part of the issue. So what does it do? If we didn't do anything, it would just go down Main Street and hang a right off into the river. Mm-hmm. And, probably still do that. But when you think of all that water has to fit through that tiny thing, you need another way for the water to get out. So the idea of these two 10-foot pipes that would also catch some of that water coming down those tributaries and give it a second access point. a second access point to get out. Now, of course, that whole system is idealized. It doesn't say that it's going to get blocked. It doesn't say that. But we're conservative with what we expect to get out of it, and it's not always apparent to someone outside of the design. So, you know, we might see a solution and say, that's a 100% solution, but on paper. But it'll never be. It'll never be in reality.
But just to clarify, is the 4 to 6 feet number, is that with those two twin culverts operating in an ideal way? I mean, if they get blocked by with trees or cars.
So what's important is when you look at the model, so we overgeneralize and simplify what we're saying, like, well, it's 4 to 6 feet on Main Street. But when you look at the model, what you're really looking at is, what's the linear extent down Main Street that's actually 4 to 6 feet? So because in a lot of areas, it dropped to 2 feet, or maybe even less. So when you're saying, well, it's a maximum of 4 to 6 feet, and that area might be, if you really were to take a look at Main Street, it's got a dip in it. So, you know, that's where it occurs. And when we're looking at the model, when we run iteration 15, we might see the 4 to 6 feet, so many feet. And then when we run model 16, we see it shrink. But what we report is it's still 4 to 6 feet. But it might only be for a smaller area. Same thing with velocity. The velocities, if you were to look at it per foot, or however you want to break the velocities down on Main Street, some of the velocities of water are below 1 foot per second. Very, very manageable. But at the worst case, it might be 4.6, 4.5. So as engineers, we don't report, well, it's going to be 0.7 feet. We can't do that. What is it on average, or what is the maximum? That's what we're reporting out. So sometimes you know, you really have to get into the data, look at the model, and see what it's really giving you. So the answer to your question is yes, there's 4 to 6 feet, but what I would maintain is that, you know, if you were to compare all the model runs, maybe that 4 to 6 feet in one of the model runs is 100 feet long. Maybe in another model run, it's only 50 feet long. So the one we pick is the 50-foot one because that's as far as we could get it, right? So, but it's not reported out. Unfortunately, it's not reported out that way to the public because we just say, well, it's 4 to 6 feet because that's the maximum.
But that 4 to 6...
I'm going to take the prerogative to pull out the hook at this point.
Pull the plug.
You know, I think we're going to be here if you want to discuss it in greater detail. It looks like you got a whole laundry list in there.
One more. Why less than 5% of retention from the HNH study? Why is that being done in terms of the square feet of retention? If you compare, I mean, is it just cost benefit? What was the reason more retention upstream is not being done?
Well, I don't know if I understand the question when you say 5%, but I think all of the retention is trying to be done upstream. The opportunities aren't as great on some of the branches as others. But I think that, and what we can accomplish in 5 years, we certainly can't accomplish all the retention we need. So, you know, we need to retain 624 acre feet. And I think that what we're trying to do is, and so we have to find opportunities to retain that. And I think that we've identified a lot of opportunities. There are some that give us a bigger bang for the buck in the immediate, in the first 5 years. So they're the ones that are being pursued. I think that there are many, many projects like underground storage. There are many other projects that are being looked at, but they're a longer term, whether it's a mid-range or a long term. It's not the immediate plan because they just can't be accomplished in that time frame.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everybody's patience this evening. The one thing that I'll say, this is why this project can't be discussed in a simple email. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the county executive for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Val. I'll be very short because we've been here a long time. Thank you, first of all, to everybody for staying so long. And if you're at home watching or if you came early and had to leave, I appreciate that as well. I was going to say the same thing you just said. This just shows you how complex this is and how difficult it is, and how I appreciate all the consultants, everyone's hard work on that, and DPZ and DPW. But we continue to want to work with the community. We continue to want to do what's best for our community. We continue to want to make sure nobody else dies. We want to make sure that people are safe, and we want to make sure this town's around for another 500 years. And that's what the goal is, and we want to do it together. So thank you so much. And I also want to make sure I thank my very good friend John Weinstein. He's been a great partner on this. He has been a visionary for this as well, so I want to thank him for doing that. And so let's have a good night, and let's keep on moving forward. Thank you very much.